Hi everyone, I'm John from Sophos and welcome to this short video where I'll be doing an introduction to the XG firewall. Like any other firewall, of course, the XG is designed to sit at the edge of your network and control the traffic that's allowed in and out of your organization. But there's a few features inside XG that really make it stand out from the competition, and we'll be looking at some of those in a bit more detail shortly. Here's the agenda we'll be going through in this video. So we're going to begin with looking at Here's the agenda we'll be going through in this video. So we're going to begin by looking at XG deployment options, and then we'll find out how you can manage your newly deployed XG firewall. We'll have a look at what you can find on the control center, and we'll have a quick overview of the features inside there. We'll look at how you can deploy your firewall in high availability arrangements. Then we'll look at the basics of creating firewall rules and policies. We'll take a little bit more of a look at how you can create interfaces, and we'll finish this session up by looking at backups and firmware. Okay, so let's look at some of those standout features in a little bit more detail, and we'll focus on the advanced threat protection capabilities first of all. So that's the ability to deal with new and unknown threats, and the XG firewall has some pretty neat tricks up its sleeve when it comes to recognizing what's likely to be a threat, even if it's never been seen before. And we also have some really good features when it comes to using multiple internet connections, using software-defined networking, and to accelerate business critical WAN traffic. And we'll look at some of those features in a future video. There's also some very neat features when it comes to web content filtering. So some sophisticated web content filtering capabilities and some very powerful capabilities when it comes to inspecting SSL traffic. And again, we're going to look at some of those features in more depth in a future video. The XG firewall is designed to fully integrate with Sophos Central, so it's the same security management platform that you might already be using for things like your endpoint, your wireless, your mobile protection, for example. And it does provide a multi-box management solution for those of you who have multiple different locations that you would like to protect with the XG firewall. And it has some very, very powerful reporting features, both on the appliance itself, but also more recently, advanced reporting capabilities inside Sophos Central as well. And again, we'll look at some of those reporting capabilities in future videos. In terms of how you can deploy your XG, well, it is of course available as a dedicated hardware appliance. In fact, there are a range of appliances that cover both small enterprises right the way up to large organizations. It is also available as a software or virtual deployment as well. So that's ideal if you've got some spare hardware that you'd like to run the XG firewall on, or if you're into virtualization. It is of course a very quick and easy way of springing up an XG firewall. And then finally, there's the capabilities to operate in the public cloud. So XG is ready to rock and roll in both Amazon Web Services, Azure, amongst many other public cloud platforms. One thing in common with all those different solutions is the extreme architecture, which is a key component of the XG firewall. So this is using the resources very intelligently on the appliance to make sure that packets can flow through the firewall as quickly as possible, thereby freeing up resources to do some more labor-intensive things like looking in more detail at SSL encrypted traffic, like dealing with new and unknown threats, and improving the performance and throughput of the appliance to make sure that it doesn't at any point become a bottleneck across the network. Okay, so enough in theory. Let's go and log into the XG management console and see what we can do. So there's two ways to access management on the appliance. The first is to use the IP address that's local and log in to the dashboard, and that will show you all of the key insights into how the box is behaving, how it's under load, and how our users are using resources like the web, for example, which is all very well and good if you happen to be in the office or if you're connected via a VPN. But if you're remote, then this is where you can use the power of Software Central. So if we log into our Software Central account, what you can see here is the Firewall Management tab, which shows us all of the critical alerts for firewalls right across my estate. And you can see that there are no significant alerts that need attention right now. You can also see that we have 3 devices under management, and I can click through the firewall tab and I can see all of those 3 appliances inside my account from a single dashboard. Now, I don't just have to manage these appliances individually. I can, for example, create some centralized policies as well. So if we click on the 3 dots over here, then we can create policy for those individual appliances, or for groups of appliances as well. So if you want to create some standardized rules across your estate, for example, then this is what you can do with Sophos Central. Now, one useful example of that might be, for example, if I'm about to deploy a new server in my estate, like a domain controller that I want all of my devices to be able to access, then rather than create that host object on each firewall individually, I can do it once, and that information will be passed out to all the firewalls that are under management that have subscribed to that particular object or policy. So it makes rolling out those central objects so much more straightforward and so much quicker and easier than having to do it individually on each firewall. Okay, so let's save centralized management for a little bit further down the line. And what we'll do now is go back to the local management console and we'll have a look at the control center. The first thing we'll look at is the traffic light system up in the top left-hand corner, which shows you how the box is getting on in terms of performance, services, interfaces, and VPNs. So there's a traffic light system here. Green is indicating that everything is fine, and if there was something that required attention, that would change to either amber or red. And each of these little icons is clickable, so we can go into, for example, the interface section, and we can look at the interfaces on the XG platform, and we can see how they're getting on. And you can see, for example, that our WAN is status green, so it's up, and you can see the sent and received traffic going through each of those interfaces. We can also get some insights into how the box is getting on in terms of its CPU and memory utilization as well. And we can see with the network tab the amount of bandwidth and the number of sessions that are going through the appliance. These are already great ways of working out if the box is sufficiently sized and is within its performance tolerance. So if we go into the center here, we've got the traffic insights. The traffic insights show us things like allowed application categories, so we can see how people are using those applications. We can look at allowed web categories, so we can see how people are consuming web traffic and if everyone's doing the things that they should be doing. And these are all clickable. So for example, here you can see there's a high number of hits on information technology. And by clicking through that, I can very quickly find out which of the users are engaged in browsing on this kind of activity. And I can also find out useful information like their IP addresses, the amount of time they've spent online, and the precise websites that they've visited as well. So it's a very interactive dashboard. So also on the dashboard, we have an insight into cloud applications. So this helps us to see how people are utilizing the world of online applications. And very easily by clicking through, we can see that popular hits include things like Office 365 and Microsoft Teams, which is to be expected because those are corporate standard applications that this organization is using. But we can classify this alternatively. So although it's a sanctioned application at the moment, if this was something we didn't want to see, we could reclassify it as unsanctioned or tolerated if it's an application that we simply put up with. Now, if we broaden out the search to a longer period of time, this will help to show some more interesting insights. So one thing which is of particular note here is the fact that we have some activity on Dropbox. Now, because the organization uses Office 365, the company standard for cloud storage is OneDrive. And here you can see that somebody is using Dropbox. We can see who that user is, and we can see the amount of data they've sent and received. So this is helping to highlight where there might be potential data loss issues through cloud-based applications. Now, over to the right-hand side here, we have our User and Device Insights tab, and this is where the XG Firewall is communicating with other Sophos protected devices on the network. And one thing to highlight straight away is the security heartbeat, which can be green, amber, or red, depending on the health of the endpoint. So here you can see there are 2 connected endpoints, both green in status at the moment. So that's good news. It means those devices are indeed healthy. So you can see just a little bit lower down, we have a feature here called the Synchronized Application Control. And this is where the XG firewall is communicating with those connected endpoints. And together they are working out new and unknown applications. So every time an application hits the XG firewall, it will try and cross-reference that against an application that it already knows about. But if it doesn't find a match, using synchronized security, we can go back to software protected endpoints so we can find more information about those applications, which we can use to help classify. So you'll see by clicking through here that we have 15 newly discovered applications, and by clicking on there I can open up the list and look at those in more detail. Some of these applications are quite common, and what this is doing is showing an extra value here of the synchronized application control. So if the software vendors have updated that application and the signatures have changed, then the traditional signature system of working out applications may no longer be accurate. And what this is doing is giving us the ability to update those signatures based on that application change. You'll see as well that all of these applications are split into categories. So what this is doing is helping to flesh out reports and making them concise, easy to read and accurate by giving you those classifications and to make the reports a lot more straightforward. So we'll find out a bit more about synchronized application control in a future video where we'll look at synchronized security as a whole in more detail. What I want to show you next is the ability to open up SSL encrypted sessions. So here you can see, for example, that 100% of traffic flowing through this XG firewall right now is encrypted, and 20% of that has been successfully decrypted. So it means we're opening up those sessions and exposing the content inside those encrypted sessions. This is particularly important because the world is shifting towards more and more encrypted sessions, and it can be a potential blind spot for the firewall. But it does come with certain complications. So if you inspect SSL traffic, for example, then you may break connectivity to certain websites and to certain applications. And this is highlighted by the section here that shows where decryption attempts have failed. By clicking through that widget, we can open up more information about the SSL transactions that are taking place. So here you can see the proportion of traffic which is going through undecrypted. You can see the amount that have been successfully decrypted as well. And most critically, you can see where errors are occurring. So you can see, for example, we have two errors here, one associated with metrics.sky.com and the other related to Google. Now, this is not uncommon because when you start to decrypt SSL transactions, there is a chance that you will interfere with functionality. So if it does transpire that these are websites or applications that we want to see inside the organization, then you can very easily click on the tab to fix these errors. And what this will do is show you exactly what the error is, and you can quickly and easily choose to exclude these applications and websites from future decryption to ensure that those things go through the firewall without being interfered with. So here, for example, if we've got things like metrics.sky and Google, we can allow those transactions to go through without issue. Okay, so if we go back to the dashboard again, then some of the other things I want to highlight on this particular screen include resiliency. So all of our hardware appliances feature certain options around making the device more resilient. But in order to maximize uptime, a lot of our customers choose to deploy a pair of devices, which can either run in an active passive mode, whereby one box is processing traffic and the other one is standing by, or you can choose to run in an active mode. You can also choose the configuration for high availability. So the quick HA mode is basically the factory default, or you can choose the interactive mode and you can get into the settings of, for example, which interfaces are used to connect appliances together into pairs, and alter things like the timeout values as you need. If we go back to the firewall dashboard, then of course one of the key things is the policies. And in this little section here, we can see how many policies we have active for things like inbound transactions using the web application firewall, for outbound policies that are user-based, outbound policies that are network-based. We can see how many times those rules are being hit, and we can also see if there are any unused policies. Now, this is a great opportunity to review the rules you've got in place, and if those rules aren't being hit, then you can either choose to delete or at least disable those policies to remove any security loopholes. Okay, so it's probably about time we had a look at how you actually create a policy. So what we'll do now is we'll go in and we'll add a firewall rule. And the first thing we need to do is give that policy a name. I'm going to call it my egress rule. And I can choose to give it a description if I want to as well. But then I need to decide what my source zone is. And I can also choose to make this rule specific to an individual source network or a device. And I can grab objects out of my predefined list. So here I'm going to put my internal network in. And I can also create a new object in here as well. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just add a VLAN in as well. So I'm going to pop in the appropriate IP address range. And I've just created a network object on the fly there, which is appropriate to this particular policy. Now, as well as obviously source, we then also have to determine our destination. In this case, I'm simply going to say out to the internet and also services. So here I'm going to grab some web-based services. We're going to go for HTTP, HTTPS, and we're going to go for FTP as well. So make sure my policy applies to those web-based types of transactions. Now, at the moment, what I've done is created a network-based policy, but what I can do is very easily turn that into a user-based policy by making sure that this rule only applies to particular types of users. So it's not just about the source addresses, but also the users that are identified on those addresses as well. So in order to make this rule work, not only does the policy have to match those networks, but then also has to match the users as well. Now, I can also create exclusions. So if there's a particular address or object or user that I don't want to have into this rule, then I can do that. So I'm going to drop in this little reference here for bad IP, and that's the one that I don't want to allow to use this particular policy. Now, what I can also do is use this as an opportunity to create some Nat rules. So I can click through on the little tab here, and I can go into creating Nat policies that would override the overall Nat policy on the firewall. So I'm going to add a rule in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to translate my original source address here through to my masquerading address, and don't need to do anything more complicated than that for the time being. Now, all of the more advanced features of the XG firewall are all pinned to the firewall policy. So if I want to carry out some additional content checks or inspections, then this is where I would do that. So I can, for example, choose to scan and decrypt HTTP and HTTPS. I can choose to send traffic off to look at zero-day threats in more detail. And I can choose to apply some web content filtering to this policy as well if I want to. I can also create new web policies in here in the same way that I could with creating network objects, for example. So if we want to do something a little bit different, then we can do that. We can also choose to use that synchronized security heartbeat as part of our policy as well. So now that allows us to carry out some additional content checks. So for example, here, we're making sure that we don't have a rogue endpoint that's compromised and leaking data out of the organization by insisting that it must have a green heartbeat. But that must be used with a certain amount of caution, because of course not every device is going to be able to generate a security heartbeat. If, for example, you can't install Sophos on the platform, then it's not going to generate a security heartbeat, and that will naturally be blocked if you tick this little box here to say that I want to block clients with no heartbeat. So use that with some caution, because you could end up cutting off things like CCTV cameras, printers, scanners, Internet of Things type devices. So do be mindful when ticking that box. A little bit lower down here, I can use additional security features like the application control. So I can put some application control rules in place if I want to block applications that might be risky, for example. That would be quite advantageous. And I can also run all of this traffic through my IPS engine and check that against particular IPS policies that are appropriate for the types of traffic that we're processing. Okay, so there's the policy that I've created. Now, of course, if traffic is going to flow, then we're going to need some interfaces. So what we're going to do is just look at the interfaces in a little bit more detail. And this is the list of interfaces on this XG firewall. Now, there's one here in particular, the dark fiber, which is currently unconfigured. So that's a good opportunity for me to show you some of the interface configuration options. So when you click on that interface, then you can see which zone it belongs to. and we can assign this to a LAN interface. And then what I need to do is give it an IP address. So we're going to give it the IP address 172.16.18.1 on a /24 subnet. And that will then open up the advanced settings that we could set, for example, forcing a negotiation with other networking appliances to a particular speed, but often we can just leave that in the auto mode. Now, if I create this as a WAN interface, it will give me the options to create further gateway details, but we're not going to do that for now. We'll just leave that as an internal LAN interface and just save that down and leave this section for now. So that gives you a bit of a flavor about how interfaces work on the XG appliance. Okay, now obviously we spent a lot of time creating network policies and configurations on this particular appliance, so it's a good opportunity to remind you of the fact that you can back up your configuration at any point and also restore previously set up configurations, and that's all handled in this section here. The same place that you would also control your firmware. So the box will periodically check for firmware, and you can see that it has the ability to have not just one but two firmware images on the appliance. So if you ever do an update and maybe things don't go as well as you would like, then it's very easy to force the XG to reboot to a previous iteration of the firmware. So very easy to do recovery. So the box will call home periodically to check for new firmware, but you can also force a check manually if you want to as well. So if you're in a particular rush to get a new feature or function, for example, then you can force the box to check as and how you want to. It's also worth mentioning as well that the box will also automatically update its pattern files. Pattern files contain things like AV and IPS definitions, and also some peripheral functions around things like the access points. And again, the box will automatically go and check for those things, or you can force that update manually should you wish to. Okay, so that is the end of this quick overview. We've looked at some of the basic functions of the XG firewall and introduced a platform to you. So keep an eye out for other videos where we'll be looking at some of the more advanced features like web content filtering, software-defined networking, and others in more detail. But that concludes this session. Thank you very much indeed for watching.